Let me say, first of all, once again, Nina, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Naomi, thanks for making this happen today, bringing her on board. We're gonna go through everything and we're gonna take some great notes. We know what you're working on, Naomi, so I know you're gonna benefit a lot from this. So my name is Madli Okumabwa. I am Nigerian American. My background is in planning and architecture. I'm the founder of CPDI Africa, which stands for the Community Planning and Design Initiative Africa. And what we seek to do is create new architectural languages for the continent and the diaspora that are culturally and environmentally sustainable, right? So how do we preserve culture going forward? Of course, being inspired by traditional design. How do we represent that in our architecture going forward, preserving the story? And then how do we also solve some of the problems that we're facing in our built environment, sourcing these answers from traditional precedent?
Yes.
So that's what we do at CPDI. We run competitions, we have classes, internships, and the 2020 internship, the one that we have this year, we welcome designers from all around the Pan-African experience to join us. Where they will focus on researching and developing these languages from their ethnic perspectives, right? So whether you're Xhosa, you're Igbo, you're Tasomba, you're Luo, you're Haitian, African American, that you will pull on the architecture of your people from the past, and then begin to create these new languages.
Yes.
So that's what we're doing in the internship this summer. And Nomi has joined us from South Africa. And so she will be presenting or doing her research, teaching herself and teaching us all about her culture and architecture. And so she'll be presenting on that today, sharing with us some of her research and then getting our feedback on how she can include that in her project in the next few weeks. So that's quick on my side. Let me go ahead and hand over to you, Nina. Please tell us all about you.
Well, I studied in South Africa. My mom's South African, my dad's Namibian. And after I finished university, I worked in Cape Town for a couple of years, and then I came to Namibia. I had a bursary to work back here with the government, and then I lasted about 10 months with the government. I'm not really a conformist, so it wasn't a good place for me, but I got another offer, and then I paid back the bursary instead of working it back. And then I started my own firm in 98, sort of doing garage extensions like everybody does, and then I won a competition in 2002 for the Habitat Research and Development Center. And by then I participated in quite a few competitions, and I decided I'm not going to care whether I win or not, because usually you lose and then it's a big disappointment. I'm just going to do the competition because I'm interested in the subject and I'm going to have fun. And then wonder above wonder, we won the competition. So maybe that was the right attitude to have from the beginning. And that was quite interesting. It opened a new door. We experimented with materials and forms, and it was a kind of a collage project where you know how they say an architect should never build his own house when you just start, because you want to put everything in it that you've always wanted, and then it ends up being like a big mess. But the Habitat Center was quite nice because I was allowed to play around with materials and things like that, and it wasn't a big mess in the end. I think people appreciate it, maybe because it's a public building and it has a lot of interest in it. And there's a variety of indoor and outdoor spaces that people can use. So I think people feel sort of comfortable with it. You know, it's not intimidating architecture at all. And in any case, so, you know, there was a lot of learning to do because I knew nothing about clay building and earth building and rammed earth and all those kind of things. And it was wonderful because it was like a crash course in these things. And the clients were the Ministry of Land, Rural and Urban Development. And I don't think they really knew what they let themselves in for, you know. But they were very accommodating, which is quite unusual for government building, and we did it. And since then, people have come to me with projects that are related to alternative materials and so on. And also because we located the project in the township, the previous black location, so that it would, you know, that it would be accessible to people and so on. And it's often used for things like, we have an organization here called the Shack Dwellers Federation of Namibia. I think they're allied to SDFs in other countries. And so they have their big meetings there. So we've become peripherally involved, and so my work developed into a lot of community-orientated work and a lot of sustainable things, and we try and bring that together as much as possible. A fair amount of the work that developed was also in tourism, because our tourism in Namibia is nature-based, and people are interested in the sustainability issues and so on. And we did, for instance, the visitor center at Twyfelfontein, the rock art heritage site, and that also opened a lot of doors. So one of the things that have been interesting is Namibia doesn't really work in terms of marketing. You know, your nowadays your website is becoming important, but press, adverts, and glittery occasions and so on, it's really word of mouth. People go to a place, they see it, and they say, oh, they like this, and then they want to make contact when they do a building. So that's been quite well. Namibia is the ideal place for me to practice, because it's got a small population, word of mouth works very well, and people tolerate eccentrics and alternative thinking. It's not, our government is conservative, like all governments are, you know, our powers that be are conservative, but because people work on trust, you know, somebody would say, okay, but Nina built with sandbags at that place and the building is there, why don't you talk to her? So people would phone up and all that. It's not like where you have a very dense population, it's very difficult to get into contact with people. It's very personal. So in that view, it's been very good for me. And also I prefer doing community work, development work, and so on. I'm really, when it comes to people having a crisis because the bathroom taps that they selected are not available, then I'm not very sympathetic, you know. So when it comes to the gold taps brigade, I really don't fit in there. So yes, so it's been a kind of interesting journey, and I get contacted a lot for information and requests and so on, and students also come to me with questions about projects that they want to do and so on. So I have, every year the university here have the third years doing 6 months work in integrated learning, like an internship. So I take 2 students every year. It's usually January to July. I've been trying to get them to do it both first and second semester, but they haven't quite got around to organising that. And then those students, when they come and they do their thesis, they come back and they discuss their thesis with me and so on, and I give bursaries and they come and work for me for the time that they've had the bursary. And it's quite nice because there's been quite a few younger generation people who have gone through the office. Some continue the kind of things that we do, and others don't. But that's their decision. You know, some people are more suited to kind of commercial, and you know, the car that they can buy with their earnings is more important to them than other things. So anyway, so that's just how it goes. Yes, and I've been getting a bit involved in education, so I'm hopefully going to teach an online seminar course for an American university from September. If if the contract gets signed, so I can't talk too much about it. I've lectured in a lot of places. People invite me to talk quite often, and then I try and give them their money's worth by being a bit provocative. I don't like doing the estate agent tour of my buildings. I'd rather like to talk about the philosophy behind it, and also like to talk about what we as architects should be doing. So 2 years ago at the AUA Congress in Mauritius, African Union of Architects, I gave a talk about the project of the AUA and so on, and what architects in Africa should be aspiring to and doing. And that was quite interesting. I end up putting a lot of work into these talks, and I don't get remunerated for them, but I find it's a good opportunity to kind of rethink what I'm on about. That I don't just carry on. It's very easy to get trapped into practice, just to follow the demands of practice, do what your clients are saying, the minutes and the schedules and all of that. And the lectures have been a way for me to actually do a bit of rethinking of issues and so on. So anyway, it's been interesting till now. So the office is now 22 years old.
Oh wow!
Wow. Yes, we'll have to see where it's going. I sometimes think I need a change now. I need to move away from practice, but on the other hand, I still enjoy engaging with the clients, and I enjoy projects. I like making things and seeing them go up. And we've got a school project for San people. They're also known as the Bushmen in the northeast of Namibia. And this project was more than 6 years in the making. From our first sketches and the fundraising and the whole thing. But we finally went onto site at the beginning of this month, and that's fantastic. So, it's for a marginalized community. They really need it. So I'm very keen to see the buildings up and being used. They are not necessarily great design in the sense that I could enter competition with them. But that's not the point. We've departed from the conventional school building in the sense that I made wedge-shaped classrooms, because the San had this tradition of gathering around the fire, and we wanted to bring some unconventional forms in, because the development fund, the trust that's supporting the schools, it's a bigger project where they want parents to be involved in the learning so that indigenous knowledge gets absorbed and so on. So the school reflects that. But I think everything is architecture. It's just a different type. And obviously the quality has to do with issues like financing and time. It's not just the design. What happens now a lot with the press and architectural journalism and the internet is that it's all about the external appearance. It's about how things look, the style. And that's not what architecture should be about. It should be about the spatial organization, how people are using it. I'm by no means a form follows function disciple, but obviously function is a major determinant. And if the buildings don't work well for people, it doesn't matter how beautiful it is.
Right.
In my view, it's not good architecture. But a lot of the architecture that we get confronted with now in the media is actually architecture without function. You know, it's dream schemes that are made up and rendered and so on. And because the renderings are so hyper-real, people confuse it with the right thing. So they think those things are what architecture is about.
Yes, right.
And not about the experience.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Incredible, incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. Nomi, I see why you why you invited her. So many shareable moments there. I'm looking forward to sharing with all of us on the platform and everyone. Your journey has been, I wouldn't have thought 20 years already in practice. You don't look like it's been 20 years.
I don't look as old as I am. I know that.
All right. Nomi, you have lots to learn. Obviously, we all do from her. And I was going through her site and amazing architecture. And true, it's not all about just what it looks like. It's so much more. It's how we use the space, how we relate to the space, even in sacred ways, right? So it's a lot more than just the aesthetics. Yeah. All right. So Nomi, you want to tell us about you and then go into your project and let us see it, and let's get Nina to make some great comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very briefly about myself. I don't have like a 20 plus years in the industry, so so my one is definitely going to be brief. I did my undergrad in Port Elizabeth. I studied architectural technology. And then my postgrad, I did it at University of Johannesburg, where I did architectural management. And it was quite interesting because it was very different from, let's say, my undergrad, because what we focused on mainly was things like policies, how developments come about, urbanism, and just the whole scope, not just looking at it from a design or technical aspect. So it kind of broadened my thinking and gave me a new perspective in a way I should view architecture. So I really enjoyed that. And I've worked in a couple of firms as well. In the Eastern Cape, I worked in one firm where we specialized in hospital designs. So it was mainly around the Eastern Cape. So we would do developments, proposals to the government as well. Then when I relocated to Johannesburg, I worked in commercial firms, but I didn't find the urge or the excitement in doing commercial buildings or something, as you did say, they just care about appearance, let it sell, because obviously at the end of the day, it's business, you know? So yeah, so I did that for a couple of years, I think 2-3 years. And then I decided to start freelancing. Since then, been freelancing, working with private clients. I would still do like a bit of government work. I'll prepare extensions. Some people would, let's say, just come and consult, you know, just provide consultation work. So yeah, so that's where I started finding my own niche within the market to say, okay, how do I position myself around architecture? And then when I saw the program of CPDI Africa, it intrigued me because I was like, okay, awesome. This is looking into African aesthetics and also just how we can create our own form of architecture. Because when I was studying, we barely touched on what is African architecture per se. It was mainly Egypt in the beginning, and that was it, you know? So we're very surfaced on it. And I would say so far being part of the program, it's opened me up to a lot of research till now, and I'm attaining something new every day. And it's really making me understand the essence of what architecture is, but also looking at it from our context. How can we embrace it, preserve it, and find a way forward in it? So yeah, so I'll just dive into my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just get straight into it. So this presentation of mine, initially we were located to select 25 elements, right, of architectural aesthetics. We looked into cultural aspects, spiritual aspects, material and sustainability and process. So with that breakdown, we had to then select 5, which will have an influence on a design proposal which we have been given to design a resort. So I'll be just explaining and going through the ones that I found outstanding, which represents my culture. Okay. So as we can see here, aesthetically, an inspired architectural form, I picked up on the beadwork and ornamentation around the Nguni clan, but specifically, let's say around Xhosas, the usage of beadwork and the colors and patterns that are also shown on them, and also having a clay pot, but what we call it in our language is a calabash or ingaza. That's the name of it, with also its patterns, which some do resemble something, which is symbolic, and others are just artistic and motif elements. So you'd find that with the colors and shapes, they do speak a specific language according to an occasion, either for marriage, new birth, or burial. So that was something that stood out for me aesthetically. And then obviously looking at it now in terms of how we've evolved with time and what influence it has had, some people are using it now as clay pots for plantation, others as vases, wall decoration, murals, also in furniture, when you look at chairs, how they utilize with patterns. And also, I don't know if you're familiar with Xhosa, but he took the brand.
Yes.
Yes.
Laduma.
Yes.
I love his stuff. I love it. It's gorgeous.
Most definitely. So he's given me a bit of influence as well in terms of how he expressed Xhosa patterns and the colors, and how he's expanded the brand, not just looking at it from a generic form, but from interior being like rugs, clothing. There's so much more that he's got in store for us. And then when you look at the cultural aspect, with the cultural aspect, I picked up as a Nguni clan. Obviously, we have different various forms with our rondables or hats. And you find that some around, we get the 6-sided one, which is a hexagonal, or the octagonal shape, which is 8-sided. And what's interesting is, as much as I may be Xhosa, but under the Nguni, there's also different shapes, like how Zulus would have more of the dome kind of hat, or Swaziland. And then how Ndebeles have more of the square shape. And then obviously they're famous for their murals on the walls and their expressive colors. So I found that very intertwined in a way, like the way it links, but also expressing each individual language. And then obviously looking at how we've evolved, we're all familiar with a lapa, which we call in, well, the Southern Africa, which is normally used as an outdoor space with a braai area where people could sit and entertain themselves. And then this, which I found quite interesting, how it's a dome shape, but also the opening is unconventional. So it's being molded and created into a creative aspect. So it's amazing what you can also create from the forms. And then this one at the bottom, it's one which I developed for my dad. I call it his man cave. It's an octagon shape at home. So we kind of played around with the elements from a traditional form, but also enhancing it with modern features. Then looking at the spirituality element, the spirituality element, I would touch mainly on livestock and isibaya, or being the kraal area. So kraal area, it's where predominantly you keep your livestock, which could be, I don't know, whatever, cattle, sheep, but that is like the most sacred space within a homestead. And you normally find that males are the only ones who are allowed to actually enter into that space. And I would view it in this context. Let's say if we want to modernize it, I'll call it some form of courtyard area, where yes, ceremonial gatherings do happen in that area. So that's why I would link it and tie it more to a spiritual element, looking at it from a from a built aspect of our setting. And then obviously expanding into in context with the design that we're going to be developing. Being a resort, how can we express these elements? Obviously, there's things like water features, which can be had. That's a symbolic element as well. Or have a sitting area where people congregate and gather together in one space in an indoor-outdoor kind of field decking, or have a bonfire, which is something that's quite familiar around most African traditions and cultures. And then we touch on material, which is what normally represents as well a place. So looking at the Xhosa culture, mud, brick, thatch, timber, poles, and stone are predominantly used. And you find that back then, obviously now concrete has been used as a form of foundation. Actually, stone was used as a form of foundation. And also thatch for roofing, which would be locally sourced. So obviously in terms of cost, things would be quite reasonable. And you find that normally men are the one who develop the framing of the roofing, and then women would come prepare the thatching. But I think nowadays it's kind of changed, but yeah, that would be the traditional form. And then obviously looking at the modernization of it, looking at obviously how the thatching, let's say for example, of the middle image, how the roofing has been done. It's very neat, angular, and just like, I don't know, like it's got some form of formation, and then obviously touched up with some modern material. And yeah, even on my right side one, how the timber slats have been used on the roofing as well. So there's many ways to play around and explore with the materials. And then touching on sustainable elements, I found this very intriguing because at home we used to have a small rendezvous with an internal bonfire, or you can say a fireplace. And I used to wonder what was that for. And actually it's quite interesting to know that the smoke actually cleans up the pests as well onto the thatch. So it's got some way of removing them. And also looking at the thermal aspect of the houses being built in mud, you pick up that during the day, the thick mud and floors are slowly to absorb the sun's heat during the day. And at night, it is admitted and when the temperatures are cooler. So it's also quite intelligent to see how natural material that was around them that they used was integrated in the designs and also just became sustainable elements. So as you can see on our images, obviously it's not exactly a hut, but it's just an illustration of the fire internally inside that space, and also like how they've used some form of shading, like creating nets onto windows. So not having to have, let's say, still form, but it's also softened on the patio area. And then also how outside having a bonfire, just as an outdoor opening space, how that ventilation just it's natural. You don't have to be creating buffers or having enclosed air conditioning and all that stuff. So yeah, and that's all about it. I hope you enjoyed.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Noe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Process. All right. Okay. Well, let me have Nina respond to. So you see, Nina, how she pulled on traditional and how she's intending to use that in contemporary ways. They're working on a resort. Their project for the internship is to design a resort and cultural center that's inspired by their individual ethnic groups. So the brief is, visitors to your town, they're on hotels.ng or hotels.com, looking for a space to rent in your town. They're attending a conference or something, and they come across your resort and they just know that they have to go there because of the way it looks, of course, on the internet marketing. And so they get there and they're just wowed once they get to the space. They're taking photographs before they even get into the building. And then when they go in, they get to learn all about the culture of the people, right? And they fall in love with them just by experiencing that building. right? So that resort is kind of like the bedroom or the welcoming space for the community. And any visitors there should walk away having, fallen in love with the people just by experiencing their culture through the architecture of the resort. So they're looking for these elements to inspire their design. So now with that, we can begin to talk about her presentation.
Nomi, do you have a site for this project? Where will it be located?
We don't have a specific site, but I do have a proposed setting for it. So obviously it will be based in the Eastern Cape because that's where my research is based. But in terms of specific site, I was thinking probably like on a cliff overlooking onto the ocean, because they are like mountainous regions around the Eastern Cape. So yeah.
So you're talking about the Transkei, for instance.
Yeah.
Okay. I grew up in Port Elizabeth.
Oh,
so yes, and I went to school there. I only left when I went to university.
Okay.
Okay, I made some notes while you were talking. So I want to kind of respond to the slides or the notes as they come along. So, start at the beginning. One of the things that I found interesting is that when you talk about the clay pot and the baskets and the beadwork and Laduma's work, you're talking about the pattern in particular. But something that I think is quite interesting is the idea of each of these in terms of their function. So, for instance, the idea that the clay pot or the calabash is a vessel, it's this rounded shape, and it's the hollow inside that makes it. Even though it's got an enclosure, it's the hollow inside that makes it. And the kind of, how would one call it, the architectural interpretation of the vessel can also be aligned to the womb, the female spirit, nurturing, growing things. And those are things that I think would be interesting if you say in Xhosa culture we have these aspects of being a woman, these rites of passage, and then, for instance, you will have the beadwork, like the love messages or other beadwork, and the clothing that goes with it. Now, I know that each different subgroup within the Xhosa have their own colors for their dresses. Nomvuzo, who used to work for me, had she had this lovely white dress, and we collected beads for her to work on her dress on the patterns. So I think that's quite interesting. When you start with your design and your organization of space, perhaps you can look at it metaphorically. That your journey through the building could be related to the journey of a woman in Xhosa culture. You are a woman, so maybe it's a suitable approach. That you look at the metaphors, that it's not that kind of literal in terms of just copying the patterns and so on. Also, what's very interesting to me is the method of making. So when you talk about the baskets, for instance, the system of weaving, if you look at your photographs where you showed the materials, there was this kind of fence. I think it was a fence on a sled or something, which was holding materials, and it showed the vertical poles and then the slats being woven into it. What I like about those kind of things, it's looking at a different way of using the materials. Slats have become fairly ubiquitous in Southern Africa. You know, it's used for shading a lot. It looks very well and so on. But these are maybe ways in which you can kind of reinterpret what is being done. For instance, if you make a shade structure from it, perhaps you can simplify a basket work layout or pattern for the shade structure so that when the sun falls on the ground through this, you have the shadow of the basket, you know, the footprint of the basket on the floor. And then obviously you can have your display of baskets and your meaning and so on, but it kind of pulls threads out of the cultural inspiration. The talk that I gave at the AUA 2 years ago, I based on the idea of weaving. That when you design as an architect, what you're actually doing is you're weaving a building. So you have your principles and your things that you follow as your warp threads. So in my case, I use things like passive design, respond to climate, local materials and whatever. These are my principles. And then the process as you weave is, you know, you start with your brief development, your concept design and so on. And as you go through this, you encounter these principles over and over again as you weave them into each other. And then the end result is a fabric, which is holistic because it puts all those things together. So perhaps when you're busy with your process, you could think of, you know, you could maybe make yourself a mood board of principles that when you're busy sketching and so on, you refer back to these things and you say, I'm busy with this, I'm busy with that, I can bring this into it and that into it. So it's kind of reiterative. You have to go back and forwards quite a lot, but it enriches the entire project. It interests me that when you spoke about building form, you isolated the hut, the rundavel, but then you showed the kraal, the entire complex. Now, an interesting story. During the war in Namibia, they had a curfew in the north, so people weren't allowed to go outside after 6 in the evening, I think, and 8 in the morning. And if they were found outside, they were shot. Then there were people who were in the kraal, moving from one building to the other, and they were shot by the military. And the Council of Churches brought a court case against the military about this. And my old boss, Kerry McNamara, actually gave expert testimony in this because he did a study of the Oshiwambo homestead. They don't call it a kraal here, they call it an Nguni. Okay. And he testified that the space between the huts is also considered the space of the home. It's not just the hut itself. So what's quite interesting for me is the arrangement of the spaces. You know, that you've got this perimeter enclosure, which is your kind of, the definition of the home is that perimeter enclosure. The home is everything inside it. Then at the center, you've got the cattle, and that's the kind of the sacred space or the spiritual place. Now, in your case, it might be a feature, but it could also be something that has more meaning in it. So if you put a fire in the middle and you call it your story circle or whatever, it's not just for people to hang out, but it's also for tales to be told. And maybe some of the elements that encircle this could be some of the information display elements that explain this culture, so that you weave these things into the design, that it's not, you don't have the information displays applied afterwards, but that they become integrated in the system from the beginning. The drawing that you showed that you had the main entrance, and then you had the cattle entrance directly opposite each other. I'm not quite sure how it works in Xhosa culture, but in the Oshivamba culture, they actually have, okay, we have it inverted. The cattle are in the perimeter. You have like a kind of passage all around, and then in the middle you have different fences demarcating different spaces, and each space is allocated to a certain gender or an age group or so, and visitors are only allowed into certain parts. So I'd be interested to know in your layout, you know, the way that the individual huts are grouped. Do some belong to the chief and or the father or the head of the household, and others to the oldest son? You know, is there a kind of hierarchy within the space that's determined, that determines the location? And then that's maybe something that you could then take further in your design and say, how we've got visitors, we've got the resident people, we've got, if it's a cultural center, then you obviously have the staff that do cultural development and so on. So how do these different groups relate to each other, and how are they located? Where can they all meet? Where is private? Where is limited to certain people? So you look at the same kind of analogies within the culture. Then what I found interesting about the material is the idea of the material as something which can be expressed. Okay. For example, the mud brick. Now, traditionally, did people build with the clay wet in wet? In other words, did they make balls of clay, and while they were still wet, put them on the walls, cob building? Or did they make a timber frame with laths and plastered that, which is wattle and daub? Or did they make bricks, like you showed in your photograph, sun-dried clay bricks, and then stack them together? Because each of those techniques can be kind of interpreted in a different way. You can expose some of the substructure if you want to. You know, you can expose some of the making process. Now, the reason for the roof, the shape of the roof and so on is also to give the building a good hat. In other words, when you use earth materials, you have to have a good overhang, and you try and keep water away from the walls. Now, when if you're designing so that outdoor space is also functional space, then these things start, you know, your overhang space, the interface between your interior space and your exterior space then becomes an important area. That's where people sit in the sun in winter, and where they sit in the shade in summer on the hut, and they sort of move around it as the sun moves around during the day. So those are also maybe things that you can have a look at, that the way the sun moves would then affect the way that you locate things. So let's say you have a breakfast area, which is maybe a buffet, and then you have a dining area, which is the evening thing, and they go around in a curve, so that in winter you get the sun in the morning and you get the sun in the evening where you want it. When you showed the slide about the time lag and the thermal aspects of the thing, I think what is interesting there is to just look at your latitude and your sun angles in that area. And then obviously, if you're going to build with thatch, it's a really heavy material and it needs a momentous structure. Now, you could build with thatch on poles, and then you can free your walls from the structure. So you're not limited necessarily to exact circles. You can maybe work with half circles and half circles, and people move like that. You know, you don't have to literally make circles. You can use the circle and the curve as a kind of inspiration. And there you can start looking at cattle form. I love the way the horns work. I don't know if you know the Ankoli cattle that they have in Central Africa with those huge horns. They're quite a status symbol.
Yeah, I've seen.
Yes. And cattle in Africa, wherever I go, if I travel with people and I'm looking for something to break the ice, here in Namibia, and I found that in other countries quite a bit as well, I talk about cattle. I ask people whether they have cattle, because most people, even if they only have one cow back in the village, people have cattle, they're interested in cattle and so on. And then you start talking farming with them, and it's as if a wall just clears away. You know, I am white, I am Afrikaans, so I have a handicap when I deal with indigenous Africans. People quite understandably don't trust me at first glance. So it's a way for me to interact and to say, but I relate to what you relate and so on. And cattle have such meaning, you know, in terms of fertility, in terms of the whole issue of lobola, you know, the fact that the young men kind of graduated from this to looking after cattle to that and so on, you know, so those were also rites of passage, and those are things that I think one can bring in symbolically very nicely. What I like to think is that one must reinterpret the cultural traditions and not just copy them, because it's important. One of the things that I really can't stand is that people now, what a lot of people do is they design a conventional building, which is actually just a Western building, and they go and put zigzag patterns on it, and they say now it's an African building. You know, that's not what it should be about. Now, if you design or if you install Laduma carpets or wall hangings, I would think that is perfect, because Laduma has taken the culture and has reinterpreted it, and he makes a high value, high fashion designed object from all these traditions. He uses local Eastern Cape wool and mohair and so on, but he's made this kind of a world-class product, and he didn't just copy. He reinterpreted. So I think that's quite important. My dad has a word which in Afrikaans is alien. It sounds like alienation, but it's not really alienation. It means in a different context. If you take something and put it in a different context, you have to kind of change it to adapt to the context. If you copy it literally, it loses its meaning. So one of the things, I quite like the idea of total design, so that when you design, if you design your resort, you don't just design the building, but you design the furniture, and you design the wall decorations, you design the information display, the textiles, and so on. So some of these things can come, you know, some of the beadwork messages can come into those materials, and where it's actually translated, you know, you kind of have subtitles for visitors of some kind, so that they can start interpreting these things. I think it's a very exciting project, and the Eastern Cape is so rich in terms of cultural traditions, and there could be even more contemporary traditions that have developed with youth and people in towns. You know, some of the rural rites of passage might have changed form in the way they move to towns. So those are also things that you can bring in. You know, when we look at traditional culture, we always think it's static, but it's not. You know, it developed from things. Now, the beadwork culture came a tradition that originated in colonial times. I went to a fantastic exhibition at the National Gallery in Cape Town once, which was about also beadwork, and I still have the catalogue. You know, it was like a scholarly academic exhibition where they looked in the sources of where the beads came from, which companies imported it, and how the patterns changed through time. Because the patterns that we see today are not the same as the patterns that were there 100 years ago or even 150 years ago. You know, the Eastern Cape was colonialized in the late 1700s, if I'm correct, already in the 1700s. So things have changed over that time. And it might be interesting to look at those developments and see how they've changed and kind of bring that into your journey through your building. Look, I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. It probably seems overwhelming, but I want to just throw ideas at you so that you can then select what you think would be interesting and valuable. The one thing that I do find a problem is that there is so little published about African architecture. You know, so if you, for instance, do a little bit of research on the kraal and the locations of things and so on, and you get information, make it into a blog, put it on this website or another website where people can access it and read it. I have students asking me all the time for information, and the information I have, for instance, about the Oshivambo homestead and its formation, I've got photocopies of an article that was printed in 1992 in the Architecture SA, which is not available anymore.
No.
I managed to, my dad and my parents were also architects. They actually taught at Port Elizabeth, but that was many years ago. And I went through their stuff and I found this, and it's an absolute treasure. You know, and it's not something that's easily available. We tend to think everything's on the internet nowadays, but it isn't. You know, so if you develop your proposal and so on with a bit more ideas, a bit more references, and you're a lot more explanatory, then something like your PowerPoint could be a paper, which you can either submit to a journal or to a magazine. You know, it can become published, so that whatever work you're doing now on the internship can also have other effects. You don't just have to focus on this building that you're designing. And what I think you will find, and that's what I found when I did the Habitat Center, is whatever research you do now, you will use for the rest of your life. You know, it will be things that will grip your mind and stay with you, and it will help you to develop your identity as an architect. I think it's really crucial to understand that it's worthwhile delving deep and sharing and trying to put together as much as you can. There.
Amazing.
If you want. Well, I hope you're recording this because I'm not. And if you ask me in 2 weeks' time, I won't remember what I've said.
No, it's definitely documented, and I feel like I'm the calabash, being the vessel, just being filled today.
Yeah, and how people make things, how people make the pots. You know, it's an incredible. My mom is a potter, so I know quite a bit about pottery, and you know, these traditional pots the skills are transferred from mother to daughter. It's not easy because the materials that they work with are often quite difficult. You know, it's not perfect potter's clay that you can buy in a shop. They have to go and dig it out. One of the things that's very interesting is if you look at the patterns on the pot, it's made from different colored clays, which women will learn from their moms where to go and to mine it. And you have to treat it in different ways to get the different effects, you know, to get the thinner burnished shiny bits and to get the rougher bits and so on. those are also things that if you say you're building with earth and you're going to have earth plaster, maybe these are things that you can bring into the coloring of the building. Also, when people work with mud plaster, they use their hands, and hands can make the most fantastic patterning. You know, it's craft. It's not construction anymore. It's real craft where people have to have skills. So these are fantastic things that you can bring in. There's in Addis Ababa, they recently opened an arts center. I don't know, Madly, have you maybe heard of it? In any case,
okay.
But have a Google Art Center Ethiopia Addis Ababa, and you'll probably it's kind of a permaculture mix art center. But the patterning they made in the mud plaster on that building is something I've never seen in my life before. It's sculpture, you know, it's real sculpture. It's high relief, and I was amazed when I saw this. So these are also things that could be brought in, you know, when you're looking at your building. Yeah, so it's a kind of, it's a whole work of art. It's not just rooms and so on. I think that these are very exciting things that you can bring in. Okay, I talk too much, so you must also say things.
Say that again, Nomi.
No, I'm saying I'm digesting.
You're digesting.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's so much to read and study, and that's what makes architecture exciting, is when you go into all of this, and you're not just trying to churn out a building that is another thing that will just sit in the glossies. Yeah. There's another thing, I think it's probably about 15 years ago or so on. There's an interior design firm called Cecile and Boyd in South Africa. Boyd Ferguson is the designer. And they did a lodge in, was it Zimbabwe? But they used very radical fabric colors, black and white, red, and like a dark blue, in the interior design. You know, so it was completely away from the safari style. You know, it was really based on the local textiles, what people were wearing, and it really gripped me because it was so different from every other place that I've seen. And I think that's also very important. When you do tourism design, it's very important to look for iconic aspects. Don't try and copy what was done at other lodges or resorts, because when they do the marketing, it just fades into the whole mass. We recently did the Shipwreck Lodge. I don't know if you saw that on the website, but
I actually posted a thing on my Instagram,
yes,
picking you up as an Afrocentric architect. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what's interesting about the Shipwreck Lodge is that I've done a lot of other tourism work, but this one has really gripped people's imagination. I've probably had by now over 100 requests for information, for press kits. You know, it's unbelievable. There's something every week. I get someone who wants to do an article or whatever. And I think what gripped people's imagination, firstly, was that it's so different. And secondly, that it's got this kind of iconic image. You know, it's the shipwreck, and it's literally little ships and so on. Some people have said it's quite Disney, and in a way I do agree with that. There is a Disney aspect to it. But tourism is also a bit of a game of smoke and mirrors, where you have to attract people to get there. And when you've got, you know, when they're flitting through the websites and the the tourism brochures and so on. You want something that grips their imagination. You can call it the Instagram moment or whatever, but it is something that is nowadays important, and therefore it's crucial not to be too generic in whatever you design. The other thing that I think is also interesting is you've got very particular wildlife and plants in the Eastern Cape. Now the speckworm has become like world known because it's got in its correct habitat, it does very high carbon sequestration. Madly, I don't know if you've heard about that. It's a type of Portulacaria, and it's a very specific plant. It's got very straight kind of branches and then little round succulent leaves. It's very, very decorative. You can Google speckworm. You'll probably find it. And this is one of the things. You also get euphorbias in the Eastern Cape, which are quite unusual. And then in terms of the indigenous animals, obviously there's the elephant park and so on. So these are also things that can be woven in, but again, not literally. And then also stories, the folk tales, you know, the river snake with the diamond on the head, you know, those are all tales that kind of discuss people's relationship with the environment, and these could also be inspiration for your center. In Australia at Uluru, there's a building that Gregory Burgess, his surname is spelled Burgess. He did a cultural center for the local Aboriginal tribe. And it's quite interesting when you read his descriptions about how he did the design and why he did it like that, in terms of how he wove the culture into the building design. Because the Aborigine don't really have their own buildings. They have more like shelters because they're nomadic, you know, they make brush shelters and so on. And for them, the landscape has great meaning. You know, they define themselves in terms of their landscape. They sing songs to describe the landscape. And you might find that a tribe in the south of Australia and a tribe in the north don't speak the same language. They don't understand each other at all. But when they sing the song, they understand each other because the melody is so old that it's kind of crossed the entire country. And there are things like that in Xhosa culture that I'm sure would be similar. Not literally, obviously not songs necessarily, but yeah, ways of preparing food, harvesting, all these things that make up people's culture, you know, the daily life issues and so on.
Great.
Okay, enough said. You must stop me, otherwise I'll just carry on as things go into my head. Yeah.
We're enjoying this. We're enjoying this.
Yeah.
You know, we truly appreciate, you know, we just spent an hour learning everything you said. I mean, this is what Nomi and myself, when I was in school, we should have been learning in architecture school, you know, creating architecture that truly responds to our location, to our community.
Yes.
Those cultural elements that make architecture near and dear to the people, because it really is celebrating how they use space. I love what you said about designing based on the seasons, following the sun, and locating your spaces. That was so beautiful. That was a real teachable moment. You said so much. And so, Nomi, you will take all of this. That was a lot. You would take all of this and, you know, sift through it. I think all of us, all of the interns are going to be better for this, right? I mean, we have this series where we're trying to bring on experts in their different cultural
Yes.
backgrounds so they can listen and learn, present their slides like she did. I mean, the goal is to have a school, a global studio, an institute where designers can just get to that space and learn what they need to learn to make a difference in their communities, to improve the built environment in their communities. So we truly appreciate all that you've shared today. We would love to have you teach some more and and not just for free. And I know I heard you. I love that when you said you go and you present, and it's not about, you know, you're not getting paid to present all the time, but what it's doing for you is much more than the money. You know what I mean? You're thinking through, you're hearing yourself, and you're evolving your own work when you make these presentations. And like you said, that's part of what they're doing. They're here to start the conversation. They're starting their research. I'm letting them know that this is just the beginning. Whatever you get from this, you're going to take it on and improve upon it through your whole career. This is your lifelong journey. It's starting now, right? So they should feel comfortable and not pressured. You know, just understand that this is the beginning. I'm gifting this to myself and then to my community, and not just their individual communities, the globe. I think everyone has a lot to learn from Africa. I mean, everyone's always been learning from Africa, but especially now talking about sustainable design, green design, taking care of the ozone, the planet, and everything. Yeah, there's a lot for us to share. I love the work that you're doing. Thank you. Please continue to inspire us.
Thank you.
Yes. Nomi, we'll let you have a few words before we free her.
I'm highly appreciative of your time, first of all, for availing yourself and actually presenting to us the meaning of architecture. Because right now my mind is just, it's beyond inspired. And, you know, it's really also making me understand, why am I doing architecture? Why am I becoming an architect? You know, and obviously the context being Africa, it applies so much significance. And I loved your expansion of even taking like one aspect, but the way you expand and your concept of woven, like you have to weave it through. That's the process, you know, and how eventually you have fabric on top. So really, I'm gonna keep that in mind as I'm designing and processing, because design is a process. And even if you say you're done, there's always more to it.
Yes.
So I'm truly inspired, and I'd love to keep in touch with you, because
yes, you're welcome.
Yeah, because like obviously since varsity, I did look into your work, but I was like, am I ever going to be in contact with this woman? So this day finally came, which I'm proud of and happy to meet you. So yeah, looking forward to see how the cultural center will evolve, and I'll give you snippets of it as I develop it as well. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. No, I like to see what happens, you know. It's interesting to see what develops. Yeah.
Nina, you will be there, so you will be part of it. We won't call it a jury. We'll just call it a lovely presentation
yes,
of our work.
That will be great.
So please, we'll be keeping in touch, and we'll be seeing you again. I'm hoping in a few weeks when they're ready.
Sure.
We'll be scheduling those presentations, and we'll have you come on, please.
That's great.
Thank you.